So, what does homelessness look like? Or better, what does a homeless person look like? A friend of yours calls you, says, "Oh, I saw a homeless person today." What image pops into your mind? What does that person look like? How might they smell? How might they be acting? We have a picture in our mind of homelessness, and we need to address this in order to address the issue. And so if you have that image of in your mind of a homeless person that your friend saw downtown or wherever this person was, think to yourself, what might be the average age of homelessness in America? Usually we think 50, sometimes younger, 20-some years old, 30, but the average age of a homeless person in the United States of America is 9 years old. The vast majority of homeless people in America are children. The vast majority are kids. In fact, these kids here are from our shelter right here in Fort Wayne that we operate. Most are kids going to school, trying to grow up, trying to make friends. The difficulties of childhood are even more difficult for them. And so while we are challenging perceptions, there's even more to the story of homeless adults. Regionally, just around here, more than 80% work. The vast majority of homeless are employed. Fewer than 10% have criminal convictions of any kind. So our picture in our mind of somebody who is addicted to drugs, has a mental illness issue, is a part of the homeless population, but the vast majority are kids, are families. And in fact, nationally, we have 1.4 million homeless kids in the United States in our public school system enrolled for homeless services. To bring it home, just in our region alone, just right here in Northeast Indiana, last school year, 1,944. Almost 2,000 kids in our public school system right here. So as I was preparing this talk, I was talking with our staff, talking about how we got going in this kind of work, how we started in social services, what we thought when we knew we were going to work with homeless people. Most said they were nervous, right? All the volunteers we have at our shelter, it's a culture shock to come in and talk to homeless people. It's difficult, isn't it? But it didn't take long for them to realize that they're like you and they're like me. They're like our families. To me, that trouble or the difficulty of working with them might be, to me, it was exciting. And that's why I got into it in the first place. In Gary, Indiana, and ultimately in Philadelphia, to work under bridges and in abandoned buildings, and saw street homelessness, and what we oftentimes say that's what homelessness is. But then you hear the stories. So many were homeless as kids before. So many had other children, so many were displaced. So we don't understand the population that we're serving, and our ways of addressing homelessness have not worked. That 1.4 million homeless kids in the United States in our public school system, that number has doubled in 10 years. Because what is usually the response? I just saw this in the news the other day. Somebody said one word solves homelessness. You could probably imagine what that is. Housing. It's a house. You could see this in the news, maybe in Idaho. We've eradicated homelessness. We have no more homeless in our state. We've built tiny homes. Tell a single mother with 4 children that a tiny home solves her issue of homelessness. Just regionally, here in our area, most of the homeless families have more than 3 children. Or even in Indianapolis, they have a great program to give jobs to homeless people. But that doesn't really count for a 5-year-old. So when we think of homelessness, we have to think beyond housing. Because I think that if we say housing is the one word that solves homelessness, it betrays two things. One, it's very much rooted in an American materialistic idea that material things will make you happy. If I have the new iPhone, then I will be happy. If I get a new job, then I will be respected. If I make $20,000 more a year, won't I be just that much more comfortable? If the homeless just had a home, wouldn't that solve the problems? It ignores the trauma that people are experiencing around us. It's not the solution when you're talking about lives. When we think of homelessness, we think of a public policy issue. We think of whatever it is that we think of, but behind that, there are people with names and stories and traumas and things that they are going through in their own lives. You put them in a house, well, what about the kids? Can they stay in the same school system? Can they stay in the same school? Can they keep the same friends? So number one, I think that we try to use material things and fix socioeconomic, cultural issues. I spent a lot of my career overseas, living and working overseas. I've seen this before in developing countries. Americans pulling up with a truck, 2,000 kilos of rice. We've now fixed hunger right here, but somebody sells rice over there. Or the glasses in Guatemala. Somebody does that to feed their own family. We can fix poverty and all of these things if we just go over there and give them stuff and leave and everything's good. We cannot use that same structure and that same way of dealing with problems here working with our own socioeconomic issues. That's number one. Number two, to say that housing solves homelessness completely ignores the connection that all of us have with each other. If this family just gets a house, things will be fine. It's on them. It's not my problem. There's not much I can do. All she needs is a job. Well, she works. She needs a car. She has a car. Get a house. Well, what more is there to life? How much more are we connected to each other? This family, the grandmother with an aneurysm, lost their home. They were evicted from their home within 3 days. I think some of these things are injustices. This city that we're standing in right now, or sitting, right now, is 13th in the nation for evicting people from their homes. Fort Wayne, Indiana is almost top 10 in the nation for evictions. And I'm not citing something from like 2008. I'm talking about the recent few years of statistics. I think if we have an injustice for this family, it threatens the justice for all of us. I think that we have a part to play. I think there's something more that we need to know. So I think there is a solution, though, at least a part of homelessness. I think it solves some of the issues of connectedness that we see around us. And I think it can be boiled down to one word. And I think that one word is advocacy. Not being heroes, giving stuff, working for others, so that we can see the benefit in them. Not being saviors for them, but advocates. To come alongside them in their time of need. Wrapped up in advocacy is love, compassion, empathy. And even if you look at the root words of compassion, it means to suffer with. If somebody else around you is suffering, you are suffering too. We are intimately connected. Recently in the news, there was a family of 13 here in Fort Wayne. Their house burned down. It was a grandmother, 2 of her daughters, and 10 grandkids. That family had been in our shelter the previous year. They got their finances back together, started making progress in life, and their house burns down with everything else in it. Everything else in it. Kids coming out of the home in pajamas, lucky if they had a shirt, no shoes. She's sitting at our conference table and doesn't know what to do. In that time, we need to be advocates for each other. Think of your own life. We're old enough to have suffered loss and crises in our own lives. We've lost parents. We've lost siblings. Lost cousins. Our own children. Jobs. And in your time of crisis, how important was it to have an advocate by your side? Not to fix everything or to do everything for you, or even necessarily to give you a roadmap through, but just to have somebody alongside you, suffering with you, feeling the pain that you feel, and then say, okay, how can we go forward? Locally, we've identified 4 things that us as a community can do to address homelessness and poverty in our area. Number 1, we need to gather better data. I kind of smirk when I say that. We're working with the state and the city. They want spreadsheets. That's number 1 thing. Data. But I think that's incredibly important. We need to know who we're working with, what the issue is, where people are. How many of you you just learned that most homeless people are kids? Until we know the population, it's going to be incredibly difficult to address it. We need to know families like these, the love that they share between each other, between daughter and mother, their names, their stories, their traumas. Number 2, to adequately address issues of housing. But as advocates together, we just had one, this was last week. A family might have had to move out of their apartment because they failed an inspection for government-supported housing. You know what it was? It was a bathroom vent. That's how they ended up failing an inspection. Well, we can take care of that. There's more that you might need to know. It's your landlord's issue, and keep people in their homes. Because of the kids that we showed you before, here locally, here in our area, the percentage of children during their time of homelessness that are abused either physically or sexually is 92%. 9 out of 10 kids are victimized during their time of homelessness. So that's number 2. We need to adequately address issues of housing. Number 3, we as agencies need to work together, collaborate together. There's a difference between coordination and collaboration. If I'm working with a family with our resources, they go on to you, my resources stop, yours begin, that's coordination. Great thing. But the best thing that we can do is to collaborate, to work together, to share resources at one time with one family on one issue, to speak together as agencies, between faith-based communities, between secular nonprofits, between churches and city government and state government and the federal government, all of us together. And let me tell you, we're in it, we do that work, and it is possible. It is possible. Number 4. Number 4 is what I'm doing right now. To be an advocate and to address homelessness here in Fort Wayne, we need to speak. We need to open our mouth for the cause of the people who have been silenced. Or better, we need to amplify their voice because they have one. We need to stand up in groups and say, look, this is what's going on in our community, and we can do something about it because we can. That's what advocacy is. On February 4th, we had a family call our shelter, say we're going to need to move in. Grandfather, grandmother, 4 grandkids. The grandfather had a job for about 30 years. A good job. He got injured on the job, could no longer work. Around the same time, his wife was no longer working. About in the same month or so that their only son committed suicide. And he had custody of those 4 children. Now that family is a family of 6, and all of those shocks put together led that family to selling their possessions, their furniture, their clothes on their porch to make ends meet. They call us, February 28th, we need to move out of our house. We're being evicted. Well, if we're going to speak for them, we're going to work together with other agencies, we're going to be their advocate, let's try a few things first. So they did. They took the $3,500 that they needed to stay in their home, worked it down to $600. I called a corporate partner. Look, you pay $300, we'll pay $300. They brought a check for $1,000. The family stays in their home, and they have health insurance for the first time in months. In months. That is advocacy. That is advocacy for the families that are here, that are right next to us, that are intimately connected with us and share our humanity. So, what does homelessness look like? Or better, what does a homeless person look like? If someone said they saw a homeless person, what would that face be? You're looking at it right now. Behind me on the screen. Their children, their sons, their daughters, their parents, their grandparents, their people. And so us as a city, we need to be concerned about our own identity. What are we doing? How are we addressing this? And instead of being known as a city by how many businesses we can attract, or how many more parks that we can build, do these things. But within our identity, let us be proud of how we treat the vulnerable. Not in how we protect the already protected. Not to be overly concerned with how we can give more comforts to the already comfortable. But all of us together here in this room, those watching this presentation, we have before us today, right now, the opportunity to advocate for one another and to be known not for those other things, but for how we treat the poor. Thank you.